What do you think of when you watch King of the Hill? Probably Texas, American suburbia, and of course propane and propane accessories.
I provide the people of this community with propane and propane accessories.
King of the Hill is the depiction of the archetypal conservative Texan. Hank Hill, the patriarch of the Hill family, is an all-American family man. So you probably would associate him and his family with football, church, and beer. You probably wouldn't expect it, but King of the Hill also gives its audience an interesting perspective on Eastern versus Western practices. Although this might be surprising to some fans of the show, hardcore fans might not be so shocked. After all, Bobby Hill is probably a reincarnated Buddhist monk. Today, I'm going to break down Season 10, Episode 5 of King of the Hill, and let's analyze what this all-American family has to say about the methodologies of the East versus the West. First, what do I mean by East versus West? Traditionally, the ways that the Eastern world, and specifically I'm looking at countries such as India, China, and Japan, view the world tend to differ greatly from the Western world. Differences in interpretations on human nature, our relationship with nature, and our abilities to understand the world around us are all topics where Eastern thinkers and Western thinkers may disagree. While this is not the case for all Western thought, a primary philosophical project in the West has been analyzing, categorizing, and making definitive statements regarding the world. Barring certain schools of thought, such as existentialism and postmodernism, Western philosophical traditions from Greece through the Enlightenment and up to modern schools of analytical philosophy focus on meticulous understandings of the world. In keeping with this tradition, methodology is an extremely important tool to Western thought. How will we acquire definitive and logically coherent understandings of the world? Rigorous methodology should, in theory, guide the Western world. Scientific endeavors are a primary example of the development of rigorous methodology. Not that the East is void of science, but rigorous scientific thought has been a staple in Western thought since ancient Greece. Now, let's look at Eastern schools of thought. Philosophical traditions from the great Eastern schools of thought, such as Taoism or Hinduism, place a lesser emphasis on strict scientific and methodological attempts to understand the world. For example, the concept of Maya in Hindu belief is that everything we perceive is ephemeral and illusory. A rigid investigation of the world doesn't grant us absolute knowledge of the world in the Hindu tradition. How could it if the world is illusory? This is a stark contrast from Western thinkers who believe that science could give us definitive knowledge. Additionally, Lao Tzu, one of the founders of the Taoist school of thought, gives us the Tao Te Ching. This text is spiritual as well as philosophical and details how we can live in accord with the Tao. The Tao can be roughly translated as the way, and in Taoist thought pervades everything in the universe. The Taoist cosmology details how the Tao becomes the multiplicity of everything we experience. This science of living in harmony with the Tao is detailed in the Tao Te Ching. Important lessons in this book include our inability to grasp the Tao, as well as the importance of living a spontaneous life, or the concept of Wu Wei. While this may be a gross oversimplification, Western thought may be conceptualized as scientific, precise, and logic-driven. On the other hand, Eastern thought, at least in the great Eastern philosophical/religious traditions, may be conceptualized as intuitive, spontaneous, and transcends human logic. Now that we've discussed a bit of the difference between Eastern and Western schools of thought, let's take a look at King of the Hill. A quick recap of this episode. Bobby, Hank's son, is going off the rails with his joking, and Hank is fed up. Bobby is typically a jokester, but lately has been relentless with his jokes. This doesn't jive well with Hank's no-nonsense attitude, and Luann suggests that Bobby channels his goofing off into a clown class. Bobby is ecstatic to be able to hone his craft, but quickly becomes disillusioned with his clown class after a strict methodology is imposed upon comedy from his professor. Bobby's demeanor has changed, and he starts to doubt whether or not he really is funny. Bobby doesn't understand the correct formula for comedy and seeks advice from his professor. Soon, after one-on-one talks with his professor, Bobby finally starts to get comedy. It starts to reject the comedy that used to make him and his peers laugh. Bobby signs up for the talent show to showcase his new comedy prowess with the help of his professor, and he bombs it. Bobby is painfully unfunny, but luckily Hank is there to save the day with a whoopee cushion. Bobby returns to his old funny self and realizes he doesn't need anything other than his own intuition to get laughs. We have two very different methodologies for making other people laugh during this episode. First, we have Bobby's intuitive and spontaneous comedy. This is juxtaposed with his professor's analytical and formulaic method of comedy. When Bobby first enters the classroom, the professor asks him why his clown nose is funny, and Bobby can't answer him. Well, why is the clown nose funny? Is there a formula or principle we should appeal to when deciding what should make us laugh? If you ask Bobby before and after his experience in the clown class, he'd probably say no. However, according to his professor, an equation can be used to determine what makes a clown nose or big shoes funny. The professor represents the Western approach to knowledge, while Bobby has a more Eastern approach to knowing. The professor is cold, logical, analytical, and well-versed in theory. In fact, he has a flowchart detailing exactly how a joke should evoke laughter. According to this formula, comedy starts with the ha, which identifies a comedic situation. This is followed by the guffaw, which creates anticipation for the audience. Should the anticipation not be achieved, a return to the ha takes place. However, if anticipation is developed, the comedian moves to the awe stage, which conditions the audience for a surprise. And finally, should the comedian succeed in all of these stages, they are rewarded with the ha-ha. This particular theory of comedy is similar to the relief theory of humor. This relief theory of humor was espoused by thinkers including Herbert Spencer and Sigmund Freud. According to the relief theory of humor, comedy is similar to a hydraulic system. That is, tensions become pent up in our nervous system, and laughter relieves us of these tensions. Bobby's professor believes that in order for something to be funny, suspense must be developed, resulting in a buildup of tensions, followed by a relief from the tensions. Other popular theories of humor include the superiority theory of humor and the incongruity theory of humor. All three of these theories have something important in common. They are all derived from Western thinkers. These major theories try to put humor under magnifying glass and find a kind of formula for laughter. Let's compare this with a more Eastern approach. While Western thought is occupied with logical structures that give us a specific way to act, in this case tell a joke, the Taoist concept of Wu Wei gives us a different directive towards action. Wu Wei roughly translates to non-action and is associated with spontaneity in action. A formula with inputs and outputs hinders our ability to act properly in the world, at least according to the Tao Te Ching, one of the sacred texts in Taoism. Instead of a cold, analytical approach to action, the appropriate approach is one that is intuitive and spontaneous. At the end of the episode, Bobby puts a pencil in a can when his classmate is attempting to drink and gets a laugh from another classmate. Bobby then says, "The old pencil in the can bit, always funny, don't know why," with a smile on his face. Bobby doesn't need to know why a joke is funny. He only needs to know that it is funny. This attitude is one from Zen Buddhist thought called beginner mind, which states that an expert may be blinded by preconceptions and experience, while a beginner may have a fresh perspective. While Bobby is certainly no beginner in comedy, he doesn't let theory and preconceived notions weigh him down. Bobby doesn't need, nor does it help when he follows systematic methodology to make other people laugh. Bobby is spontaneous and intuitive and knows how to make people laugh without knowing comedy. Bobby embodies the Eastern approach to knowing, and King of the Hill seems to agree with Bobby over his professor. Instead of having to sit around and find the best equation to make others laugh, King of the Hill suggests that we go with the flow and let our intuition guide us, just like Bobby's guides him.